Star Citizen is well on its way to raising upwards of $1 billion towards its development. It's already one of the most expensive games ever made. Definitely the most expensive if we're talking about the amount spent in development. Most games will spend an insane amount on marketing and then hopefully make it back with game sales and or microtransactions, but in the case of Star Citizen, the game is crowdfunded, so they're only spending what we give them. $700 million later, and the game is still in alpha. While most people will see this and write it off as a scam, understandably so, I personally do have faith that this will eventually release, or at least get out of alpha in the next 10 years, if we're lucky. I've been playing this game a lot recently, and while a solid 70% of the time the game is borderline dysfunctional, when it does work, I can understand how it's raised this much. What Star Citizen promises to be, the experience it's aiming to provide, while definitely not for everyone, is something I think is worth striving for. Which is why, when I say Star Citizen has what I'd consider to be a fatal flaw, it's coming from a place of genuine concern, rather than an attempt to dunk on the game in any way. Now, fatal flaw might be a bit overstating it, but I do think it's quite significant when looking at this game's future. This flaw is the game's monetization. Now, I'm sure you've heard many people talk about how ridiculous the game's monetization is with $1,000 ships and $48,000 packages, but that's not what I'll be talking about here. I'll get to the point. Star Citizen is objectively pay to win. The current model of monetization is to sell ships to players in their so-called pledge store, which is really just a microtransaction store. Even then, calling a $900 purchase a microtransaction just kind of feels weird, but don't worry guys, it's a pledge to support the game's development. Even when you initially try to buy the game, you'll have numerous more expensive options with more expensive starter ships. The thing is, ships in Star Citizen, while very beautiful and detailed, are not cosmetic, they're a utility. Meaning, a more expensive ship, more often than not, is significantly better at doing what it's made for than a cheaper alternative. As you're probably aware of, generally in multiplayer games, to maintain the game's competitive integrity and keep it fair, the only thing you can buy with real money is cosmetic items that have no real impact on gameplay. Now, I can excuse the fact that Star Citizen is pay to win right now, as it's just the reality of the position Cloud Imperium Games is in, especially because they're more or less having to invent the technology for the game to function. That being said, the hope is that the pledge store and the entire ship selling thing will be gone on release. A matter of fact, CIG themselves said this a long time ago. Okay, about this claim, I've seen a lot of players say this is something CIG said, that they would no longer sell ships on release. But no matter how much I look, I can't find where exactly this was said. Yet, there are dozens of players corroborating that this is a promise they made, on Reddit, on forums, everywhere. I will continue with the assumption that they did say this at some point even though I couldn't find it. Keep that in mind that I have no official source. And it's unlikely that it wasn't said considering how many people said that they remember it. But then again, it's the internet and misinformation spreads easily. Even then, if they didn't say this, it doesn't really change the core of my argument. The question becomes, will they actually honor this statement that they allegedly made? Well, I highly doubt back in the day CIG expected the game to raise as much as it has or for the pledge store to generate as much money as it has. While in a perfect world, CIG would honor their statement, I think it's quite possible, likely even, that CIG will walk this back and continue selling ships into the game's official 1.0 release, which sucks. What I find equally disheartening is how many players within the Star Citizen community that are completely accepting of this. Some have just accepted that this is just how the game is gonna be and there's nothing they can do about it. But even worse than that, some people will actually try to defend the game being pay to win. One of the arguments I've heard is that the ships in Star Citizen take a lot of work to make and develop, and the people who make them deserve to be compensated. And I agree that Star Citizen ships take a lot of work. Not only are they incredibly detailed, but even from an engineering standpoint, they're very functional. For example, the landing gear is amazingly engineered. It doesn't just disappear into the ether when you retract it, it actually folds up and fits into the hull. It takes a lot of work to put something like that together. That being said, does this justify making the game pay to win? I mean, there are other games where you can buy skins and such, and those take a lot of work to put together. Maybe not to the same extent, but definitely a lot of work. Would that justify those items giving players a competitive advantage? Most people, including myself, would say no. That's not to say people making these ships shouldn't get paid. They definitely should. I just don't think it should be from selling ships. Plus, I highly doubt they're getting paid a percentage of the ship sales, like if a ship sells more, they get paid more. I don't think that's what's going on, so the argument that the game should be pay to win for them is absurd. Another argument I've seen people make is that the game is really expensive to make, and the only way CIG can keep the game going is if they sell ships. I don't necessarily agree. Like I stated before, I'm more tolerant of the game being pay to win because we're still in development. I'll be significantly less accepting when the game officially releases. I'm no game developer, but I'm pretty sure games are a lot more expensive to make than they are to maintain. It makes sense that CIG needs a lot of funding right now, as they're still in the process of putting the game together, especially because they're having to, like I said before, more or less invent the technology to make the game function. I can't imagine the game will be this expensive to make content for when it officially releases, and CIG has perfected the technology and their workflow. Yeah, maybe this does mean the rate of which we'll get new content will be lower, but I'd say that's a pretty good trade-off to ensure that the game is fair for everyone. Plus, I think selling cosmetics is perfectly fine, no matter how predatory they want to get, once it gives no one a competitive edge. Okay, so this is me from editing. A quick note. I forgot to mention that once the game releases, Squadron 42 is going to be out, so that's another expense that they won't need to concern themselves with. So the idea that they need another $700 million over the next decade is just absurd. So yeah, I think they should get by selling cosmetics, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't really know what I'm talking about, but still. One more argument people make, and this will be the last one I discuss for the sake of brevity, is that the game can't be pay to win as there is no winning. Star Citizen isn't a competitive game. It's a sandbox game about space exploration and whatnot. I disagree. First, I don't think Star Citizen is a game about space exploration, at least not right now. For exploration to work in a game, it needs to actively reward exploration. That's why No Man's Sky, in my opinion, is pretty overrated. There's currently no game loop in Star Citizen that centers around legitimate exploration with any real reward. No one actually said that about exploration, by the way. I just wanted to mention that and put it in there. But the idea that Star Citizen isn't pay to win because there is no winning is just false. First of all, there is PvP combat. Once you're outside an armistice zone, you can technically get PK'd. From this, it's reasonable to deduce that having a more powerful ship will give you an obvious advantage in combat scenarios, which, say it with me now, is pay to win. Some people will say more expensive ships won't always give you an advantage. Some of the larger ships are harder to maneuver and manage. Of course, that argument just kinda dies when you take into account the fact that larger ships carry larger guns. I mean, the Javelin-class destroyer capitalist ship is a thing, and it has a fucking railgun capable of one-shotting almost anything, I hear. And yeah, you do technically need other players to man these guns. Except not really, as CIG plans to add NPCs you can hire to manage your ship. Even if the best NPCs aren't as good as players, with multiple turrets on some ships, it's still an obvious advantage. The point is, Star Citizen does have PvP components, which will obviously be unfair if the game is pay to win. But even if you look beyond PvP to more passive playstyles like cargo trading, there is still competition. In a 1.0 release, the most profitable cargo routes in the game are most definitely going to be very crowded. Thus, supplies of whatever is being traded there will be low. When supplies do get restocked, having a larger ship with a larger cargo hold means you can buy more, thus giving you the clear advantage. No matter how you slice it, having a more expensive ship will give you a clear advantage in this game. Now, I don't want to misrepresent the Star Citizen community here. I'm sure players are supportive of maintaining the game's competitive integrity, but I've seen quite a bit of players who are at best apathetic and at worst straight up defending the game being pay to win. This is, in my opinion, quite dangerous. The more people willing to accept this method of monetization, the more comfortable CIG will feel walking back their decision to stop selling ships on release. And again, that's assuming that they actually said that. I am still hopeful though, which is pretty dangerous when talking about Star Citizen, so it's best to assume the worst. But I am hopeful regardless, because Star Citizen is a game that has systems that don't really work whilst the game is pay to win. For instance, CIG is planning to implement a ship insurance system, where when your ship is destroyed, you can make an insurance claim to get a new one. Right now, because we're in alpha, this system isn't live, and all the ships can be claimed regardless of insurance status. But when 1.0 does go live, this is something players will need to take into consideration. Most game packages right now come with at least 3 months insurance, which will start cutting down on release. From what I can tell, the idea is if your ship gets destroyed whilst having no insurance, it cannot be reclaimed. Now, do you see the issue here? If the idea behind the ship insurance system is to make it so that if you don't insure your ship, you lose it, then what about if you bought your ship with real money? The ships you buy in the pledge store don't come with lifetime insurance, so you're presumably gonna lose it. Yeah, the item you bought with real money. Now, I highly doubt CIG would implement a system where you can lose something you bought with real money. That would be kinda nuts, right? Well, turns out right now, if you buy armor from the pledge store and die losing said armor, it's gone, and you'll need to either rebuy it again or reset your character, which I'm pretty sure you can't even do anymore, or wait for the next patch, which will restore those items, I think. Now, to be fair, I'm sure they'll implement a better system where things you buy from the store will stay with you permanently, but you see what I mean when I say the game isn't really built around being pay to win? Oh, did I also mention that armor isn't completely cosmetic? It's not like they're reskinning armor sets that are in game, they're just selling them. So, you know, let's hope they're not doing that on release either. To go back to the ship insurance thing, I doubt you'll completely lose your ship if it's not insured. But then that brings the question, why not just give everyone that paid for the ship's lifetime insurance? Now, mind you, this system would work perfectly fine if it wasn't possible to buy ships with real money. You'd have a system where players would need to insure the ships they would have grinded to get, else all that time spent would have been a waste. Even if the cost of insurance in-game is really low, it doesn't change the issue with the system as it pertains to buying ships. But I think it's really funny the idea that someone will spend upwards of $900 on a ship just to lose it because they forgot to renew their insurance, and it just gets deleted from their account. I'm not saying that'll happen, but it's just kind of funny. Another quick note about the insurance system is that for some weird reason, your insurance covers getting a brand new ship, but won't pay to repair the one you already have. Meaning, if you sustain damage that'll cost thousands of in-game credits to repair, it's literally cheaper to move out all your items, destroy the ship completely, and then request a new one, which is kinda funny. So yeah, the entire system needs a rework before release. Star Citizen is meant to be an MMO, thus you could expect the game to get quite grindy. The devs have said as much.
Lower mission rewards and higher prices mean grind? Do we want grind?
Yes.
We we want an MMO. We want game pay, we want opportunity, we want years of Star Citizen. We don't want 40 to 60 hours. I got an 890 jump, I'm done. I'm gonna go and play.
We want, like, you feel more connected to things that you've had to put more time into getting. You know, there's other MMOs where you do raids that take absolutely hours, and the rewards you get from them feel even better because of the effort you put into it. And it is effort versus reward, right? The grind is a part of the effort, and your reward is how an item makes you feel.
It's interesting that they would say all that, because if Star Citizen were to continue down its current trajectory, that would make these guys complete hypocrites. They talk about that experience of working really hard to get something and appreciating it more, and I do agree. I have no problem with it taking a long time to get an endgame ship. But if you're also selling said endgame ships for real money, it means if a player is wealthy enough, they can completely skip the grind. They can completely just skip that experience. And because ships are functional, it means someone could outbuy you, and it would take tens if not hundreds of hours to catch up. The thing is, as much as I'm an advocate for the game being fair for everyone, and I think it's the right thing to do, it turns out that Star Citizen was always intended to be pay to win.
Subscription-based model for Star Citizen?
Oh no, there's not going to be a subscription-based model for Star Citizen. So we're sort of following the Guild Wars 2 model, where you buy your initial package. In our case, it's sort of a ship package. And then after that, you'll play, and we don't charge any subscription. And hopefully we'll make enough money from new people joining and buying the initial packages. And then we allow people to buy some game credits with real money. But we do limit that, but those two sources of revenue we hope will sort of be able to let us add new content and run the servers. You know, the big sort of principle is that there is nothing in the game that you can't earn. So there's no like items or anything that you only can pay with money. So all you can spend some money on is either buy your initial package or a few more game credits. And that's really just for you know, the 40-year-olds or the 30-year-olds that now don't have 30 or 40 hours a week to obsessively play in the game. I want to play a few hours on the weekend, but maybe they want to drive that, you know, fancy-looking spaceship. So it's sort of pay for convenience, I guess, what the idea is. But
Ah, so we're paying for convenience. Okay. And this was said 10 years ago, by the way. So, yeah. Honestly, I'd prefer they just sell ships instead of in-game currency. Because when talking about the insurance system, I'd hate for someone to buy a ship with said currency and because it's not locked to their account, they lose it. What I find really annoying is when people say, oh, you can get the item for free in-game, Like, bro, that literally still makes the item pay to win. If to get the item for free, you need to grind for 50 or 100 hours, can't you see how it's kind of unfair that some people can just drop a few $100 and get it instantly? An interesting theory I've heard is that CIG is gonna keep Star Citizen in alpha indefinitely and keep selling ships, milking the space whales. Especially since recently they've been uttering the sentiment that Star Citizen will never be finished, hinting that there will be no hard 1.0 release. The more time goes on, this is seeming less and less like an unfounded conspiracy theory and something that isn't beyond the realm of possibility. I mean, I still don't really believe it, but who knows? But that's it. That's the fatal flaw. Some of you might not care, some might be upset that I even pointed this out. I've seen people get really defensive when you bring this up. But in the end, if the Star Citizen community is willing to tolerate this or even accept it wholeheartedly, who am I to tell these whales that it's a flaw? The dream that Star Citizen is promising, the dream of another life in space through the digital realm, is one that CIG might not attain. But I personally think CIG can do it. I just don't know if that's gonna be the life for me. Only time will tell. Like and subscribe, tell me what you thought, and thanks for watching.